Hello friends. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. When I finally signed the papers for my first home, I thought I'd reached the quiet part of my life. After years of saving, of moving between rented rooms and shared apartments, the little two-bedroom house on Maple Ridge Road in Asheville, North Carolina, felt like freedom. It wasn't fancy. Old wooden siding painted pale green, a front porch that leaned slightly to one side, and windows that needed new screens. But I didn't care. It was mine. The realtor called it a fixer-upper with character. The kind of phrase that usually means you'll regret this later. But I didn't. Not at first. The first few nights, I'd sit on the porch with a beer and just listen to the forest. You could hear owls and crickets, the rustle of the wind through the pine trees that lined the backyard. The quiet felt like a reward after 10 years of noise and people and chaos. I'd gone through a rough breakup the year before, a long, exhausting end to a relationship that had eaten away at me slowly. She wanted to live in the city. I wanted space. She said I was distant. I said she was loud. We were both right, I think. So, when the house keys jingled in my hand for the first time, it felt like starting over. I worked from home, editing software manuals for a tech company. My days were silent. Just me, my laptop, and the faint hum of the refrigerator. The house had this smell, like dust and pine mixed with something old. The realtor said the previous owner, Howard Gates, had died there, peacefully in his sleep. His daughter had cleared most of his belongings, but left a few things. A coat rack in the hallway, some nails in the walls, and an old pull-down attic ladder that creaked like bones when you touched it. The attic door hung above the hallway between the bedrooms, a square wooden hatch with a cord that dangled like a forgotten noose. The first odd thing happened about 3 weeks after moving in. I woke up one night to a sound, faint, muffled, like footsteps above my head. Not heavy, not random, deliberate, slow. I lay there, eyes open in the dark, listening. My heart counted the seconds between each creak of the ceiling. I told myself it was nothing, maybe the wood contracting, or a squirrel trapped somewhere. But there was a rhythm to it, a weight. It was pacing. I grabbed my phone and opened the flashlight, aiming it toward the ceiling as if that would help. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The next morning, I tried to shrug it off, made coffee, sat on the porch, told myself old houses make noises. But when I came back inside, I noticed something strange. The attic cord was swinging slightly. I froze. There wasn't any draft, no air conditioning running, just stillness, except for that cord, moving gently, like someone had just tugged it and stepped back. I stood there staring at it for what felt like a full minute before forcing myself to laugh. "It's just air pressure," I said out loud, like hearing my own voice could make it less real. That night, I made sure every window was locked, even checked the attic hatch, gave it a firm push upward to make sure it was sealed. Then I went to bed. Around 2:40 in the morning, the sound came again. Creak. Pause. Creak. It was the same pacing motion, slow, measured. My pulse thudded so loud it drowned out the sound for a moment. I got up, grabbed the flashlight again, and stepped into the hallway. The cord was hanging lower than before. It wasn't my imagination. The hatch was cracked open half an inch. I stood beneath it, trembling, staring at the black line cutting through the ceiling. Then, something shifted up there. Just the faint scrape of fabric brushing wood. That was enough. I bolted back to my room, locked the door, and sat in the corner until the sky turned pale blue. In the daylight, fear always feels foolish. You tell yourself it couldn't have been real, that it's just your mind feeding on shadows. I forced myself to check the attic that afternoon. I pulled the cord. The ladder unfolded, groaning. The air that came down smelled stale, faintly sour. I climbed 3 steps up and shone my flashlight. Nothing. Just beams, insulation, and dust swirling in the light. Still, I scanned every corner, and that's when I saw it. A crushed water bottle, half buried under insulation near the far wall. Next to it, a small, dirty blanket. I froze. That wasn't something left by the old owner. That was recent. I climbed down, pushed the ladder up, and tried to steady my breathing. Someone had been up there. The police came that evening after I called. A young officer named Peters did a quick inspection. He went up to the attic, looked around, and came back shaking his head. "No one here now," he said. "Could have been a raccoon or a drifter." "You lock your doors at night?" "Every one of them," I said. He nodded, wrote something in his notebook, and left with a polite but unconvinced smile. I didn't sleep that night. Days went by. The house began to feel hostile, like it resented me. Small things started happening. My bathroom door would be half open when I came back from the store. Drawers slightly ajar. One morning, the toilet seat was up, and I live alone. I started keeping notes on my phone, tracking each incident like some detective in my own life. Then, one night, it escalated. I woke around 3 a.m. My room was cold, unnaturally so. The first thing I noticed was that my bedroom door, which I'd locked, was now slightly open. The second thing was the faint sound of breathing. Not mine, from the hallway. It was slow, raspy, shallow, like someone trying to stay quiet but failing. I didn't move. I stared at the dark gap in the doorway, waiting for it to move. After a minute, the sound faded. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I bought a motion camera from a local store. Small, Wi-Fi enabled, night vision, cloud storage. I hid it in my bedroom bookshelf, aimed at the door and hallway. That night, I went to bed early, the camera light blinking faintly. I told myself this was the final test, proof I was either paranoid or in danger. The motion alert came at 2:46 a.m. The buzz of my phone ripped through the silence. I opened the app, hands trembling. The live feed loaded, a grainy view of my dark room. I could see myself in bed, motionless. Then, the bedroom door opened. Slowly. A shadow stepped inside. It was a man, tall, thin, wearing dark clothes. His hood covered most of his head, but his posture was unmistakably human. He stood in the doorway for a long time, motionless, facing me. Then he moved. He walked toward the foot of my bed, crouched, and leaned slightly closer, as if listening. The sight made my stomach turn cold. Then, he turned and disappeared out of frame. The video ended. I left the house before sunrise. I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the house like it might start breathing. Then I drove to the police station. When they saw the footage, their entire tone changed. Within the hour, there were 3 patrol cars outside my house. I waited across the street, unable to breathe properly. When they came out, they had him. A man in his late 40s, filthy, handcuffed, eyes hollow. He didn't fight, didn't speak, just kept his head down. The detective later told me his name was Daryl Hobbs. He'd been living in the attic for almost a month. They found everything up there. A sleeping bag, empty cans of food, a plastic jug for water and urine, and a small notebook filled with handwriting. Notes about me. He wakes around 7:30. showers at 8, works until 5. Talks to someone named Laura on Thursdays. There were even sketches of the house layout, markings of which floorboards creaked. The detective said he'd been getting in and out through a vent behind the garage. He'd watch me leave for groceries, slip down quietly, steal food, then climb back up. He'd been watching me sleep for weeks. When they arrested him, he barely reacted. Later, I learned he'd done it before, twice in other towns. He was a drifter, moving state to state, breaking into houses with single occupants. I asked the detective how long he thought Daryl had been watching the house before moving in. He said, "Probably since before you bought it." That thought stuck in my head for weeks, that maybe the first day I toured the house, while I was walking around with the realtor, he was already there. Quiet, hidden, watching us from the attic. I moved out that week, didn't even pack properly. I hired movers, told them to empty the place, and waited outside the entire time. I never set foot inside again. They said Daryl was sentenced to 5 years. Doesn't feel like enough. For 2 weeks after, I slept in my car. I couldn't stand being indoors. Eventually, I found a small studio apartment downtown. No attic, no basement, no closets, everything in sight. But even now, months later, I can't relax. I keep every light on at night. I check behind the shower curtain before using the bathroom. I sleep facing the door, phone in my hand. Because no matter how much time passes, I still wake up sometimes around 3 a.m., hearing creaks that sound like footsteps above me. And I'll catch myself staring at the ceiling, waiting for a sound that doesn't come. But the silence is worse, because silence makes you wonder if he's just waiting. Again. Last week, I went through the storage box that I'd kept from that house. Inside, among papers and tools, I found something I hadn't noticed before. A photo from the home inspection. It was of the attic, taken before I moved in. Zoomed out, showing the insulation and beams, and behind one of the beams, barely visible, a human shape, a face. He'd already been there, even before I owned the house. I found the house on Ridgeview Drive during one of those restless weeks when everything in life feels like it's about to collapse, but hasn't yet. I was 28, newly single after ending a 6-year relationship that had eaten away at me piece by piece. I wanted silence, space, somewhere that didn't remind me of who I used to be. The house stood at the far edge of Hawthorne, a small town in Oregon, where the rain never seemed to stop. A 2-story craftsman tucked behind a row of cedar trees, its windows clouded from age, its paint faded into that dull shade of gray that makes you wonder if it was ever bright at all. The realtor, Mr. Colton, talked too fast, like he was trying to convince both of us that the deal made sense. He kept saying things like, "It's a hidden gem and just needs a little love." The rent was low. Too low, actually. When I asked why, he cleared his throat and said, "Previous tenants moved out early. Job transfer." That same vague answer you get when the truth is probably something else. But I didn't care. I signed the lease within an hour. Moving in took 3 exhausting days in late October. Boxes, furniture, endless rain. The floors creaked with that deep, hollow groan that old wood makes when it hasn't been walked on for a while. The kitchen smelled faintly of damp earth and lemon cleaner, like someone had tried to scrub something away. My favorite part was the upstairs window, a wide bay frame overlooking the backyard woods. The trees pressed in close, their black silhouettes swaying against the constant drizzle. It felt peaceful, in a lonely kind of way. The first week was quiet. I'd come home from my job at a small insurance office, heat up a microwave dinner, and eat by the window while listening to the rain on the glass. It was the kind of silence that feels like a fresh start. But it didn't stay that way for long. The first strange thing happened 10 days in. I'd bought groceries, enough to last me a week. Cereal, chicken breasts, yogurt, coffee, the usual. That night, I cooked one chicken breast and put the rest in the fridge, neatly sealed in a zip bag. The next morning, when I opened the fridge, the bag was empty. Not opened. Empty. No chicken. No juice. Just a clean plastic bag, like it had never been used. I stared at it for a full minute before laughing out loud. Because what else do you do? Maybe I'd forgotten to put them in. Maybe I'd dropped them or left them in the grocery bag. I searched everywhere. Nothing. It was weird, but I let it go. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time it was coffee. I'd bought a fresh bag, expensive stuff, imported beans, and after making just 2 cups, it was half gone. I started to think maybe I was losing it. Maybe I'd been drinking more than I thought. That's what I told myself. But small things began to pile up. A jar of peanut butter half empty after a single sandwich. The TV remote found on the kitchen counter when I swore I'd left it on the couch. A light left on in the hallway when I was sure I'd turned it off. Tiny, almost insignificant things. But together, they started to scratch at something inside me. Then, around the second week, I woke up in the middle of the night, maybe around 3 a.m. At first, I thought it was thunder. Then I realized it was coming from inside the house. A dull thud. Then another. Soft, careful, like footsteps, but above me. I held my breath. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was so deep I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I told myself it was just the wind. Maybe a branch hitting the roof. Still, I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I climbed up into the attic hatch in the hallway. It hadn't been opened in years, judging by the dust. The air up there was thick and stale, heavy with that sweet rot smell of wet wood. I waved my flashlight around, just old boxes, broken furniture, insulation that had turned gray. Nothing else. I shut it again and told myself to relax. By November, I was checking the locks before bed like a ritual. Front door, back door, windows, attic cord, everything. Still, every few nights I'd wake to that same faint sound, creaking, dragging, a soft shift in the ceiling. Once I thought I heard breathing. That's when I bought cameras. Tiny, motion-activated ones that connected to my phone. I placed one in the living room facing the stairs, another near the kitchen, and one aimed directly at that hallway ceiling hatch. If something was happening, I'd catch it. For 2 nights, nothing. Then, at exactly 3:14 a.m., I got the first alert. Motion detected. I opened the live feed and my heart nearly stopped. The hallway light flicked on. Slowly. Then, the attic cord swayed. Nothing else moved. No sound. But the cord kept swinging. I stared at the screen until it froze. Connection lost. The next morning, I called the landlord. He sounded annoyed, like I was wasting his time. Said the house was old and creaky, and that wood expands and contracts. I didn't mention the video. Somehow, I knew he wouldn't believe me. That night, I barely slept. Every noise sounded deliberate. Every shadow seemed alive. By the third night, I was jumping at my own reflection in the window. Then came the smell. It started faint. A sour, sweaty odor that hung near the laundry room. At first, I thought maybe it was the plumbing. But by the next day, it was stronger. Musky. Animal-like. When I checked, I noticed something I'd missed before. A small vent cover near the baseboard behind the washer, slightly bent. It looked pried open. I knelt down with my flashlight. The gap behind it led to darkness, deeper than a normal wall space. Something about it made my skin crawl. I told myself I'd call pest control the next day. That night, the motion sensor went off again. 3:09 a.m. laundry room. I didn't check. I just locked my bedroom door and stayed up until morning. When the pest control guy came, he looked around the vent for a minute before frowning. "This isn't standard," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked. He tapped the wall. "This whole section's hollow, like someone carved out a crawl space behind the laundry area. You sure this was on the blueprint?" Blueprint. I didn't have one. I told him it was an old house, probably just outdated construction. He shrugged and left, but his words stuck with me. A hollow space. 2 nights later, I got another alert. Motion detected. Laundry room, then hallway, then kitchen. It was a smooth line, like someone walking casually through my home. I dialed 911 immediately, whispering into the phone, describing the alerts while I sat shaking on my bed. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. Officer Hale, older, calm, steady, and Ramirez, younger, sharp-eyed. They checked the house top to bottom. Nothing. All doors locked, windows secure. But when they reached the laundry room, Hale called out softly. "Found something." Behind the washer, hidden by the shadows, was a square hatch, painted the same off-white as the wall. A latch with no handle. They pried it open. The air that came out was cold and foul. Inside was a narrow tunnel, no higher than 3 feet, leading into darkness. Ramirez shone his flashlight in. There were footprints in the dust, bare ones. They followed the tunnel. It led to a small hidden compartment under the stairs. Inside, a sleeping bag, empty food containers, a flashlight, a half-broken phone charger plugged into an outlet I didn't even know existed. And there, on the ground, were 2 of my missing yogurt jars, cleaned and stacked neatly beside a notebook. When they opened it, I saw my own name written over and over on the first page. Page after page, notes. When she leaves for work, when she showers, when she turns off the light. Dates, times, small observations written in slanted, messy handwriting. The officers exchanged a look. "Whoever this is," Hale said quietly, "they've been living here for a while." They stayed for hours, checking every corner, every lock. The vent outside had been modified. Someone had attached a small pulley so it could be opened from inside. They told me whoever it was must have escaped through the woods before they arrived. I spent the rest of the night at a motel. Over the next week, detectives found fingerprints, but no match in the system. They said the crawl space had signs of long-term use. Old wrappers, rusted cans, a child's drawing tacked to the wall. Someone had been living there for years. The landlord admitted he'd rented the house multiple times before, each tenant leaving early. He claimed ignorance. I moved out 2 days later. Couldn't stand being inside that house another second. Now I live in a 1-bedroom apartment downtown. Small, modern, safe. No vents big enough to hide in, no attics, no basements. Still, sometimes at 3 a.m., I wake up for no reason. The silence feels heavy, like something's listening. And every now and then, when the wind moves through the building, I swear I can hear the faint sound of creaking wood, as if someone is shifting their weight above me. February in Vermont hits like a hammer. Snow so deep it eats the sound right out of the air. But that morning, when I first pulled up to the old Colonial on Meadowlark Lane, sunlight bounced off the frozen trees like glass, and for a second, it felt like the world was offering me a second chance. I was 30, newly divorced, and halfway through a midlife breakdown that came 10 years early. I needed quiet, a clean start. Somewhere, no one knew me as Eli's ex-wife. The realtor, Martha, was this overly cheerful woman in a red coat, tapping her long acrylic nails on her phone as she talked a mile a minute about square footage and neighborhood safety ratings. She barely let me breathe. Said 3 other people were coming to see the house that same day. Typical sales pressure, but I didn't care. The place had soul. Wide plank wood floors that moaned under your feet, high ceilings, and a wraparound porch that looked out over endless pine woods. The kind of house that had stories buried in its walls. I fell in love the moment I stepped inside. 2 weeks later, I was hauling boxes up the icy front steps, cursing under my breath, while my dog, Murphy, a nervous shepherd mix, darted from room to room to room, sniffing everything like a detective. The house smelled faintly of pine cleaner and something older, like old wallpaper and damp winter air. I liked it. It felt lived in. Martha had said the previous tenants relocated suddenly. She didn't elaborate. When I asked the mailman later that week, he just shrugged and muttered, "That place doesn't keep folks long." I laughed it off. I'd lived through worse. Lawyers, therapy, a marriage that ended in more silence than shouting. A creaky old house wasn't going to scare me. The first week was uneventful. I worked remotely as a medical transcriber, typing late into the night while Murphy snored beside the radiator. The house was cold but peaceful, surrounded by snow so thick you could forget there was a world outside. The neighbors waved politely but kept their distance. Classic Vermont courtesy. Polite hellos, no questions asked. I was starting to feel like myself again. Until the night the knocking started. It was a Tuesday, exactly 19 days after I'd moved in. The clock on my nightstand read 3:12 a.m. Murphy lifted his head first, ears twitching. Then he growled. Not his usual low grumble at shadows. This was deeper. A warning. I sat up, heartbeat climbing, listening. Then came the sound. 3 slow knocks on the back door. Not frantic, not random. Knock. Pause. Knock. Pause. Knock. Each one deliberate, echoing through the empty kitchen, vibrating through the floorboards. Murphy pressed himself against my leg, whining. I waited. My breath fogged in the cold air. The knocking stopped, leaving behind a silence so thick I could hear my pulse. I didn't move for the rest of the night. Morning brought sunlight and false comfort. I checked the back door. No footprints in the snow. Not even an indentation. Just smooth, untouched white stretching out into the woods. It didn't make sense. When I asked my neighbor, Tom, the retired postmaster 2 houses down, if he'd heard anything strange during the night, he just frowned. "You'll get sounds out here," he said. Old wood. Animals. Wind plays tricks. But he avoided my eyes when he said it. 2 nights later, it happened again. Same time. 3:12. Same 3 knocks. I froze, watching the shadows stretch across my bedroom wall. Then it came again, but not from the back door this time. Knock, pause. Knock, pause. Knock. From the side of the house. Murphy barked like mad, but wouldn't leave the room. The knocks moved, slow, circling. Back door. Side window. Front porch. Each set measured and patient. By the time I found my phone and called the sheriff's office, the knocking had stopped. 2 deputies came out 20 minutes later, flashlights cutting through the snow. They checked footprints, found none. Checked the locks, all secure. Deputy Collins, the younger one, told me to install motion lights. The older one, Price, said quietly, "If it happens again, call sooner." Something in his tone told me it had happened before. I installed lights the next morning, and cameras. 4 of them, connected to my phone, 1 on each side of the house. My brother, Mark, helped me set them up, cracking jokes the whole time. But even he went quiet when he noticed how the snow beneath the back steps looked disturbed. Not footprints exactly, just compressed, as if someone had stood there for hours and the snow had melted slightly under their weight. I brushed it off. Probably animals, I said. Probably nothing. For 3 nights, everything was still. Then, Friday morning, 3:09 a.m., my phone vibrated. Motion alert. I opened the app. The feed from the backyard camera loaded first. A man. Tall, wearing a thick black parka, hood up, standing 10 feet from the back door. Perfectly still. The image quality wasn't great, but I could tell he wasn't facing the camera. He was facing the house. For a long time, he didn't move. Then he lifted one hand, gloved, and knocked on nothing. 3 times. Knock. Pause. Knock. Pause. Knock. Like he was knocking on invisible walls around the house. Then he turned, disappeared behind the side porch. Another camera picked him up seconds later. Same rhythm, same motion. Knocking on the air. He circled the entire house that way. Deliberate. Slow. Never touching a door or window. Just pretending. I called 911. By the time the deputies arrived, he was gone. Detective Erin Hale came by the next morning. She was calm, focused, mid-40s maybe. The kind of woman who didn't waste words. She asked to see the footage. I handed her my phone. She watched the video 3 times in silence, pausing at the moment he turned his head slightly. You couldn't see his face, just a blur beneath the hood. But when she froze the frame, I could see something else. A faint shape in his other hand. A small wooden mallet. The sound you heard, she said, might not have been his hand. She told me to keep my lights on at night, to stay somewhere else if possible. When I asked her if anyone else had reported similar things, she hesitated. Then she said softly, "You're not the first." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with Murphy pressed against my knee, watching the cameras. Every few minutes, I refreshed the feeds just to prove to myself that he wasn't there. At 3:11 a.m., the alerts came again. But this time, there was no one on camera, just static. Flickering, distorted images, like interference. Then, for half a second, a shape flashed across the frame, a hooded figure moving between the trees, barely visible through the snow. Then, gone. The next morning, Hale called. She sounded tense. She told me they'd had a situation the night before, same pattern, at a house 2 streets over. A woman had called 911 reporting knocking around her home. When deputies arrived, the back door was wide open, snow tracked across the floor. No sign of the intruder. The woman had fled to her car and refused to go back inside. I asked if she was okay. Hale didn't answer. She just said, "Keep your cameras rolling." Days passed. The snow deepened. The knocking stopped. I started to believe it was over, that maybe whoever it was had been caught or scared off. Then came February 27th. At exactly 3:08 a.m., every motion alert went off at once. All 4 feeds. I watched in horror as the man appeared again, this time closer. No longer standing at a distance, he was at the windows. Each one. Moving between them in the same slow rhythm, pressing his hand, that same gloved hand, against the glass. Then knocking, 3 times on each pane. Knock, pause. Knock, pause. Knock. His breath fogged the glass, but his face was still hidden. Murphy barked until his voice cracked. I shouted that the police were coming, though my voice barely worked. The man didn't flinch, didn't look up. Just finished his final round of knocks. Then walked into the tree line and vanished into the dark. When Hale and the deputies came, they found footprints this time. Perfectly measured steps circling the house, exactly 3 feet apart, leading back into the woods. They followed them nearly half a mile until they disappeared at a frozen creek. No other signs, no vehicle, no discarded items. Just gone. But the weirdest part? Every footprint was identical. No scuff marks, no difference in depth, as if someone had placed them there. Hale didn't like that. She said so out loud. 3 days later, the news broke. A couple living 5 blocks away, the Danners, were attacked in their home. Forced entry through a basement window. They'd survived, but barely. The suspect had been found hours later, hiding in an abandoned cabin by the river. His name was Owen Dyer, 42, maintenance worker from a nearby town. When they raided his apartment, they found notebooks, maps, schedules, sketches of houses. My address was there. My house. Even notes about Murphy. Dog. Defensive. Light sleeper. And on the last page, written in shaky handwriting, door not ready yet. Still learning, Detective Hale told me later that Dyer had been practicing, rehearsing his approach, that he'd been caught in another neighborhood before, but released for lack of evidence. They think he'd watched people for months, maybe years, studying their habits until he was sure he could get inside unnoticed. I asked her what he meant by door not ready yet. She said maybe he was waiting for the right moment, the right weakness. Then she said something that still chills me. When people knock, she said, it's to be let in. It's been 5 months now. I moved out of that house 2 weeks after they caught him. Sold it at a loss, didn't care. My new place is a small apartment above a bakery downtown. No woods, no basement, no back door. But I still wake up sometimes at 3:12 a.m., heart racing, ears straining. And sometimes, when the heater clicks on or the pipes shift, I swear I can hear it. Knock. Pause. Knock. Pause. Knock. And Murphy, even in his sleep, starts to growl. When I first signed the papers for the little house on Marigold Street in Ashbury, Maine, it felt like someone had finally handed me my life back. My divorce had been finalized just 2 months earlier. My brother kept trying to make me laugh, saying, 35 is the new 25, Sam. But the truth was, I didn't feel young. I felt hollow. 6 months on his couch will do that to a man. The house was small, 1 story, a faded yellow ranch tucked between tall spruce trees, and a quiet cul-de-sac of retirees who spent mornings trimming hedges and afternoons gossiping by mailboxes. I wanted something peaceful, something mine. And the moment I stepped onto that cracked driveway, the smell of salt air from the nearby coast mixed with damp pine needles, I thought, this is it. This is where I start over. The first week was all unpacking, caffeine, and learning which light switches worked. I painted the living room white to make it feel brighter, replaced the old smoke alarms, and set up my small drafting table near the front window. I'm an architectural designer, mostly freelance blueprints for local contractors, so I figured I could work from home, enjoy the quiet. Every morning, I'd take my coffee onto the back deck and watch fog roll over the marshland behind the fence. It was beautiful in that eerie New England way. Soft mist swallowing the trees until the world looked half-finished. I remember thinking how lucky I was until the messages started. It was a Tuesday morning, 9 days after I'd moved in. I was making oatmeal when my phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. The text said, "Blue hoodie. Nice choice. Fits better than the green one." I froze. I was wearing my blue hoodie, the one with the small paint stain near the cuff. I hadn't even posted a picture or gone outside yet. I typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came instantly. "Maybe try the blinds next time, Sam." Sun's nice, but privacy's better. I turned toward the kitchen window. The blinds were halfway open, sunlight spilling across the sink. The view from there looked out toward the marsh. No houses directly behind me, just a long fence separating my yard from the wild overgrowth beyond. Still, I yanked the cord so hard that one slat snapped off. For the next 10 minutes, I paced the kitchen, staring at that phone, waiting for another buzz. When it didn't come, I told myself it had to be a wrong number. But deep down, I knew better. The next text came that evening. "Your dinner's burning." I turned. The frying pan on the stove was smoking, blackened fish sizzling into charcoal. The message had come before the smoke alarm even went off. My skin went cold. Someone could see inside my kitchen, maybe from a window I'd missed. I went room to room, pulling every curtain tight, checking corners, even climbing onto a chair in the hallway bathroom to reach the tiny frosted window near the ceiling. From up there, I could see faint shapes through the glass, trees, light, movement, enough to realize how visible I'd been from outside. I latched it shut. Then another text. "That's better. Took you long enough I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, watching shadows move across the blinds like ghosts pacing the porch. By morning, I convinced myself it had to be some local kid playing a prank. Maybe they'd found my number through a real estate listing. Still, I called the local police station. The officer on the line, Dispatch Sergeant Holloway, sounded polite but bored. He said unless there was a threat, there wasn't much they could do. "Document everything," he said, like he was reading it off a manual. "Block the number if you can." So I did. For a few hours, it felt like the nightmare was over. Then, at 11:07 a.m., another message appeared, from a different number. Blocking doesn't help. Holloway always says that, doesn't he? He's on desk duty because of his back surgery, poor guy. My stomach dropped. I hadn't said the officer's name out loud, not once. That's when fear turned to something heavier. Violation. I shut off my phone, threw on a jacket, and went outside. The air smelled wet and metallic, like rain was about to break. I walked the perimeter of the yard, scanning the fence line. It stretched around all sides, 6 feet tall, weathered wood, no obvious gaps. But behind it, the marsh stretched for acres. Reed grass, birch trees, old, half-collapsed sheds from decades ago. Anyone could stand out there and watch without ever being seen. By noon, I was on the phone with my cell provider, demanding they trace the number. After an hour of transfers and apologies, I finally got someone in their fraud and security department, a woman named Carmen. She was calm, but direct. She ran a trace while I waited, and when she came back, her tone had changed completely. "The number's from a prepaid phone purchased locally," she said, 2 weeks ago. Cash. No ID required. Then came the part that made my skin crawl. The GPS pings we're getting show the device has been stationary for the last 4 days, roughly within 300 meters of your address. She paused. Basically, the same block. I asked if she could be more specific. She hesitated, then said quietly, "Sir, it's somewhere directly behind your property line." I didn't wait. I grabbed a flashlight and walked down the narrow path along the fence, mud sucking at my boots. The air grew colder, thicker. About 30 feet out, I found a small clearing I'd never noticed, a patch of flattened grass facing my house. In the center, half buried under wet leaves, was a plastic folding chair. Beside it, an old thermos, a pair of binoculars, and an empty phone box. I don't remember dropping the flashlight, but I must have, because the beam jerked wildly across the mud as I stumbled back toward the fence. When I got inside, I locked every door and called the police again. This time, they sent someone. Officer Leland arrived 20 minutes later, mid-40s, polite, the kind of calm that feels practiced. He walked the yard with me, flashlight cutting through the dark. When I showed him the chair, he crouched down, inspected the ground, then looked back at me. "These footprints," he said, "are old. days, maybe weeks, I asked what I was supposed to do. He told me to install cameras, motion lights, maybe get a dog. Could be a squatter, he said. Could be someone using the woods to sleep rough. Don't panic, but the thing is, there hadn't been any tents, sleeping bags, or trash. Just that chair, facing my window, perfectly aligned. I ordered cameras that night, 4 of them, linked to my phone. By the next evening, I had them mounted around the property. Front porch, back deck, driveway, fence line. For a few days, everything was quiet. Then, on Saturday, at 3:17 a.m., the backyard alert went off. I grabbed my phone, half asleep, opened the feed. Someone was standing by the fence. It was hard to tell in the dark, but I could see long hair pulled into a bun, a heavy coat, and a small handheld device glowing faintly blue. A woman. She wasn't moving, just standing perfectly still, facing the house. Then she lifted her hand, pointed toward the bathroom window, and waved. The screen went black. The next morning, I replayed the footage over and over, trying to zoom in. The video glitched at the same second every time. I sent it to Officer Leland. He said they'd look into it. That night, I barely slept. At dawn, I took my car out and started driving through the nearby streets, Maple, Cedar, Birch, every loop around my neighborhood, checking parked cars, alleys, driveways. It was 6:45 when I saw it. A silver Honda Civic, parked on the shoulder 2 blocks down, angled perfectly to see my house through the gaps between trees. Inside sat a woman, gray hair in a neat bun, wearing dark blue scrubs. Her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror before I even stopped. I pulled over behind her, trembling so hard the key fob slipped from my hand. She rolled down her window halfway before I could say anything. "Good morning, Sam," she said softly. Her voice was calm, unnervingly so. "I was beginning to wonder when you'd come find me." My mouth went dry. "Who are you?" She smiled faintly. "You could say I'm the last person who truly knew your house." She reached into the passenger seat and lifted a thick folder. "Here. You should see this against every rational thought." I took it. Inside were photographs, not of my house, but of what used to be there before it. A 2-story Victorian, pale green, with white trim and a front porch that didn't exist anymore. There were birthday photos, a Christmas tree in the old living room, even one of a man lying in a hospital bed near a window, the same window that now looked out from my kitchen. "I lived there for 41 years, she said, until the developer bought the land. Said it was cheaper to tear it all down than repair the foundation." Her voice stayed steady, like she was explaining a weather forecast. "My husband died right where your dining table is now." I stepped back, clutching the folder. She kept talking about how she'd taken jobs cleaning offices at night to afford the mortgage, how she'd come every week to watch the new construction from the woods just to see what they built in place of her life. When the house sold, she'd gone to the county clerk's office to read the deed, learned my name, my job, the closing date. When I asked how she got my number, she just smiled. "I cleaned the office of your realtor last winter," she said. "People leave papers everywhere." She told me she'd memorized the floor plan, mapped every window's angle, found the perfect spot to watch, the same spot where I'd found the chair. I told her she was insane. She didn't react, just looked at me with those calm blue eyes and said, "I just wanted to make sure you were taking care of it." When the police arrived 15 minutes later, she didn't resist. No shouting, no running. She even told them she understood why I called. They charged her with harassment and unlawful surveillance, though she was released within days pending evaluation. Her name was Evelyn Rourke, widowed, 61. No prior record, It's been 2 months since then. I've had new locks installed, cameras upgraded, fence rebuilt. But every morning, when the mist rolls in from the marsh, I catch myself staring toward that same patch of reeds, half expecting to see her there, sitting quietly in that folding chair, watching. And sometimes, when the fog grows thick enough to swallow the trees, I swear I can see a faint light flicker out there, soft blue, like the glow of a phone screen. The divorce papers were barely dry when I found the house. It was 3 a.m., my third drink of the night sitting untouched beside my laptop, while I scrolled through endless listings I couldn't afford. Then I saw it. A 2-story Craftsman on Willow Creek Drive, just outside Hollow Bend, Oregon, listed for $118,000. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, recently remodeled, stamped in bold letters. The photos looked sterile and perfect. New floors, modern fixtures, fresh white paint, sunlight pouring through spotless windows. Too perfect. Still, I sent an inquiry. The realtor called the next morning, a woman named Teresa Klein, voice chipper but oddly impatient. "It's a cash-only sale," she said, "but the owners are motivated. No inspections needed if you can close fast." That should have been my first red flag. But desperation has a way of silencing reason. After 15 years of marriage and 1 catastrophic divorce, I just wanted a place that felt like mine again, something quiet, detached from the noise. Teresa met me at the property that Saturday. The house sat at the edge of a cul-de-sac, its wooden porch half wrapped by overgrown lilacs. Beyond the backyard fence ran a trickling stream that gave the area its name. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. Inside, everything smelled like paint and lemon cleaner. New tiles, new cabinets, no personal touches at all. When I asked about the previous owners, Teresa just said, "Job transfer." They moved east. Then she changed the subject, pushing papers toward me before I could ask more. I signed everything that day. By the following Friday, I had keys in hand and a half-empty U-Haul idling in the driveway. It felt like the start of something better. The first few weeks were blissfully ordinary. I unpacked, painted, set up my home office in the smallest bedroom overlooking the creek. The nights were colder than expected, damp Oregon air creeping through window frames, but peaceful. I learned the rhythm of the house quickly. The soft creak of the floorboards near the pantry, the occasional drip in the upstairs bathroom, the hum of the fridge like a low, steady heartbeat. By October, I'd started to feel something I hadn't in years: comfort. That lasted until the day I met Mr. Leary, the old man from 2 doors down. It was a gray Sunday morning. I was raking leaves when he wandered over, cane in hand, thick flannel shirt buttoned to his chin. "Glad to see someone finally moved in," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel in a tin cup. I smiled. "Yeah, I guess the market worked in my favor." Leary chuckled, but didn't smile back. "You must have gotten one hell of a deal after what happened." "What do you mean?" He tilted his head, eyeing me curiously. "You didn't hear? The Harpers, the family that lived here before you, just disappeared last spring. Whole lot of weirdness afterward. Police came, then contractors. Place was gutted before the summer was out." I forced a laugh, pretending it didn't bother me. "Probably just rumors," Leary shrugged. "Maybe." But no one ever saw them leave. He tapped his cane twice on the porch rail, then turned away. That conversation stuck in my head like a splinter. The next day, I tried calling Teresa. Her number was disconnected. The Klein & Associates Realty logo on my paperwork didn't match any registered business online. The supposed title company, Northway Holdings, didn't exist either. I opened the manila envelope with my closing documents and spread them across my kitchen counter. On the surface, everything looked official. Signatures, seals, stamps. But when I tried to verify the notary license, it came back invalid. The attorney listed had been disbarred 5 years ago. Every call I made ended in confusion or dead ends. By evening, panic was setting in. Had I just bought a house that didn't legally exist? That night, as I sat in my office surrounded by boxes of files and printouts, I heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap. Faint but deliberate, coming from behind the wall to my left. At first I thought it was the pipes, old house noises. But then it came again. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 2 more, like someone knocking from inside. I stood there, frozen. The sound stopped. I didn't sleep much after that. Over the next week, the sounds continued, always between midnight and 3. Sometimes scratching, sometimes whispers. I could almost convince myself were the wind. Then, one night, the whispers formed a word. Help! I tore that room apart, pulled the desk away, pressed my ear to every inch of plaster, but nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were somehow wrong. The next day, I went to the county courthouse in Hollow Bend and requested property records. The clerk, a balding man named Riley, looked uneasy when I handed him the address. He said, "You're not the first to ask about that one." He brought me a file box labeled Willow Creek, Lot 47. The documents inside were a mess. Missing dates, conflicting signatures, gaps of several years where ownership records just vanished. According to the most recent legitimate record, the last registered owners were indeed the Harpers, and they had never officially sold it. Riley leaned close and whispered, "We've had 3 cases like this. Different counties, but same paperwork style. Fake agents, fake companies, and remodels that happen overnight. Always after disappearances, I left with my head spinning. When I got home that evening, the front door was ajar. Nothing appeared stolen, just shifted. Chairs slightly angled, blinds drawn differently, the rug in the hall folded under at one edge, and on the kitchen counter, where my closing documents had been, sat a single Polaroid photo. It showed the exterior of my house, taken from across the street. In the bottom corner, written in pen, were 2 words, "Not alone." I called the police. Officer Keller came, a young guy trying too hard to sound reassuring. He checked the locks, looked around, then said, maybe it was a prank. Could be neighborhood kids. But kids don't forge legal documents. Kids don't know your name, your agent, your address history. Keller promised to patrol the area for a few nights, then left me with a card and a shrug. By then, I'd already decided what I needed to do, figure out what was behind that wall. At 1:45 a.m., armed with a hammer, I started with the wall in my office. The first hit cracked plaster. The second tore through insulation and dust. Behind it, wood, but not framing. A panel. Someone had built a false wall. I pried it loose, flashlight in one hand, and stared into a dark, narrow passage running the length of the house. The smell hit first. Stale air, sweat, mildew, then the sound. Breathing. I aimed my light down the tunnel and saw the faint outline of a door, old, wooden, half covered in wallpaper. My pulse thundered in my ears as I crawled inside, every creak echoing like gunfire. The tunnel connected to what must have been part of the original structure. Narrow hallways lined with faded photographs, newspaper clippings pinned to the walls, headlines about missing families, dates going back to the 1970s. At the end was a small room, a cot, a lamp, and shelves of labeled VHS tapes. Each one had an address written in marker. I found mine among them. I took the tape, stumbled back to my living room, and fed it into an old VCR I hadn't used in years. Static first. Then footage. Grainy night vision of my living room. Me unpacking boxes, cooking dinner, sleeping on the couch. The camera angle was from inside the vent. Someone had been living inside the walls, recording me. My stomach turned. As I reached for the phone to call 911, I heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy, deliberate. Then a door creaked. The police arrived 7 minutes later, sirens blaring, lights washing over the windows. They found a hidden crawl space behind the upstairs bathroom, leading into a warren of small rooms, wedged between the studs and exterior walls. Inside, a mattress, canned food, notebooks, and dozens of Polaroids of me sleeping. But the person who took them was gone. No fingerprints, no hair, no trace. The officers swept the house and surrounding woods, but whoever it was had vanished into the night. Keller told me quietly before leaving. We've seen setups like this before, usually ex-contractors or squatters. Sometimes worse, he didn't need to say what worse meant. I moved out within 48 hours, sold what I could, left the rest behind. The new buyers were a young couple with a baby. I warned them about what I found, even showed the police reports. But they didn't believe me. 6 months later, I saw the house on the news. Family missing. Willow Creek home under investigation. The same photo of that craftsman house flashed on screen, yellow tape fluttering in the rain. And behind it, just visible near the kitchen window, was a pale face watching from the dark. When I signed the lease for the little house on Ash Grove Drive, I thought I was buying peace. Not luxury, not convenience, just silence. For the first time in years, I was completely on my own. No roommates, no parents, no one leaving dishes in the sink or hogging the Wi-Fi. Just me. And the old creaking cottage with its white picket fence, ivy-covered porch, and the faint smell of cedar that clung to every wall. The landlord, a balding man named Mr. Halpern, had smiled too much when we met. He had those watery blue eyes that never seemed to blink long enough. "Quiet place," he'd said, jangling a set of brass keys. "Old, but sturdy. Been in my family for years. You'll love it here. I'd been desperate. Rent was cheap, and the neighborhood was safe enough. So, I signed that day. I should have known peace never comes cheap." The house was small, a single-story unit with a basement door that stayed bolted shut. Halpern said the basement was just storage, full of old junk. I didn't care. I had no reason to go down there. My first week went smooth enough. I unpacked, worked my shifts at the animal shelter, and spent nights watching movies on my laptop with the faint hum of crickets outside. Then little things started to happen. A hallway light left on, a faucet dripping when I knew I'd turned it off. Nothing big, the sort of things you shrug off when you're tired and new to a place. But it built up. The kitchen light. Always the kitchen light. I'd flip it off before leaving for work, take a photo just to prove it, and come home to find it blazing bright again. At first, I thought maybe it was a wiring issue. Old house, bad electricity. But when I found the deadbolt half-turned, my stomach dropped. I'd always been obsessive about locks since my college break-in years ago. So I knew I'd locked that door tight. That metallic scraping sound when the key hit resistance, I'd never forget it. Now it was always there, like someone had used the lock, then twisted it just slightly open again. I called Halpern the next morning, trying to sound casual. "Hey, just wondering if you or anyone else has been around lately. I keep finding the lights on." He chuckled. "Ah, yeah, that'll be my brother, Eli. He checks the pipes and filters. Make sure things are running smooth. Old houses, you know. Gotta keep an eye on 'em." He said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something about his tone, like he'd rehearsed that answer. "Would you mind telling me when he stops by?" I asked. "Oh, Eli works odd hours. Can't really say. But he's harmless. You won't even notice him." That last line lingered in my mind long after we hung up. A week later, the kitchen light wasn't the only thing moving. My mug, the chipped blue one from college, shifted from the right side of the sink to the left. The throw blanket on my couch folded itself differently. Even my toothbrush had changed sides on the counter. I told myself it was stress. New place, long hours, exhaustion. Then I found the attic door. It wasn't locked, just hidden. A small square panel in the hallway ceiling with a rope dangling down. When I pulled it slightly, a wave of dust rained on my head, and a faint odor, like old sweat and damp cloth, hit my nose. I froze. Someone had been up there recently. The next morning, I noticed my back door's frame had fresh scuffs around the lock, thin, shallow scratches, as if a key had slipped one too many times. 3 nights later, I woke up to a soft thump. Not loud, just enough to jolt my half-asleep brain awake. Another. And another. It was coming from inside the walls, like someone walking softly, barefoot, over floorboards just beyond the drywall. I lay perfectly still. The sound stopped. Then, a low creak. The attic ladder. Every instinct in me screamed to move, to run, to do something. But I just lay there, staring at the ceiling until morning light spilled through the curtains. When I checked the hallway, the attic rope was swinging, ever so slightly. That afternoon, I bought a small wireless camera from an electronics store, the kind that looks like a phone charger. Cost me more than I could afford, but peace of mind was worth it. I placed it facing my bedroom door, synced it to my phone, and waited. That night, I pretended to sleep. Every creak of the house felt amplified, every shift in shadow a threat. Then at 2:11 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. My pulse spiked. I opened the live feed and froze. The door handle turned, slowly, carefully, and then the door opened. A figure stepped in, tall, lean, wearing dark clothes. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be Halpern's mysterious brother Eli. But when the man turned slightly toward the light, my stomach dropped. It was Halpern. He crept toward my bed with practiced steps, like this wasn't the first time. He stood over me for nearly 5 minutes, motionless, his breathing barely visible on camera. Then he leaned closer. So close I could see the gleam of his glasses catching a faint reflection from the window. He reached toward my pillow. His hand hovered, then withdrew. He turned, walked to my dresser, and opened the top drawer. He touched things, moved things, then looked toward my closet. The door opened and he stepped inside, disappearing from view. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it echoing in my skull. I didn't dare move until the video showed him leaving. At sunrise, I packed a bag and went straight to the police. Officer Lena Mendez, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, calm voice. When I showed her the footage, her face drained of color. "He's been doing this a while," she said quietly. "You're not the first tenant from Ash Grove we've heard weird things from, but you're the first with proof." Within hours, they arrested him. When they searched Halpern's home, they found keys, dozens of them, each tagged and labeled Ash Grove 12A, Maple View 3B, Hillstone 7C. In a small padlocked drawer, they found photographs, Polaroids, women sleeping, different houses, different beds, same eerie angle, the kind you'd get if you were standing right beside them in the dark. I thought that was it. case closed. But 2 weeks later, detectives returned to the house for a full inspection. And that's when they found the hidden space under the basement floor. Not a regular basement, a crawl space, wide enough for a person to lie flat. Inside, blankets, water bottles, food wrappers, a small battery lantern, and a folded lawn chair. Someone had been living there. The air smelled like mold and sweat. The wood beams above the space were freshly scraped, as though someone had pushed up through the boards repeatedly, right beneath where my bed had been. I moved out that night, didn't even bother cleaning. Sometimes, when I try to sleep in my new apartment, I still imagine I hear faint scraping sounds under the floorboards. And when I wake, I always check the camera feed first, just to be sure. When I first moved into the house on Waverly Street, I thought it was a fresh start. After my divorce, I just wanted somewhere quiet, a small, steady place where nothing unexpected could reach me. The house had been sitting empty for a few years. A modest, single-story place with pale yellow siding, a small porch, and a yard overtaken by weeds. It was the kind of house you pass by without noticing. Too ordinary to be interesting, too clean to seem haunted. The listing had described it as vintage charm with modern upgrades, which I quickly learned was code for old bones and new paint. Still, I liked it. It smelled faintly of rain and old wood when I stepped inside for the first time. The floors creaked in a way that felt honest. The kitchen counters had been redone in white laminate, and the living room had a big bay window that let the morning light in like gold dust. The real estate agent, a woman named Karen, had been cheerful. She told me the previous owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Downs, had passed away peacefully years ago, and that the property had recently been refurbished by a small local company. I nodded, pretending not to notice the faint marks on the floor. Long drag lines, like something heavy had once been pulled across it. I told myself that was nothing, that everything old carries a little history. The first few weeks were normal, calm even. I unpacked slowly, worked from my laptop in the dining room, and tried to enjoy the quiet. There was an unusual echo in the hallways, though. Something about the acoustics made it feel like sound lingered longer than it should have. If I coughed, I could hear it fade a second too late. A strange, delayed whisper of my own voice. One night, while hanging a picture frame in the guest room, I noticed the wall gave a slightly hollow sound when I tapped it. Not in the usual way. It felt deep, like there was more than just empty space behind the drywall. I pressed my ear against it. Silence. I shrugged it off. Old homes always had odd patches, unused vents, boarded-up closets, long-forgotten repairs. But over the next week, I began to notice other things. The hallway light flickered occasionally. The smell of cedar, faint but consistent, seemed to come from that same stretch of wall. And every now and then, when the house was quiet and I sat reading, I'd hear a soft noise, a click, like a switch being flipped somewhere inside the walls. It wasn't until the third week that I stumbled on something concrete. I had gone to the city office to pick up some renovation permits. Out of curiosity, I asked if they had an original floor plan for the house. The clerk, a young guy with glasses, printed out an old blueprint and slid it across the counter. The paper was yellowed and slightly brittle, labeled Waverly Street, Lot 48, constructed 1962. When I looked closer, my brow furrowed. According to the blueprint, the house had 4 rooms along the north wall, but mine only had 3. Between the bathroom and the guest bedroom was a narrow rectangle labeled Storage, 6 by 10 feet. There was no storage room there, just a plain section of wall about 6 feet wide. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I measured the hallway, from the bathroom door to the guest room, and compared it with the layout on the blueprint. Didn't match. There was a gap, a space that shouldn't exist. I knocked on the wall again, hollow. I remember standing there for a long time, barefoot, the measuring tape hanging loosely from my hand. Every instinct told me to stop thinking about it, to leave it alone. Instead, I went to the garage, found a small hammer and screwdriver, and started prying at the edge of the baseboard. The paint cracked easily, flaking off like dried skin. Underneath, I found a faint seam, the outline of a doorway that had been filled in and painted over. My heart thudded. I chipped away more of the plaster until the outline became clearer. Someone had bricked up a door. Not just plastered, bricked, and then painted to match the wall. That was the moment the silence of the house started to feel heavy, almost watching. It took me 2 days to decide to open it. I borrowed a small rotary tool from my neighbor, Ben, who thought I was just fixing old drywall. By evening, I had carved out enough of a section to break through. The hole was only large enough to peer through at first. The air that came out was thick and sour, like wet concrete and rust. When I shone my phone's flashlight through, I saw tile. White ceramic tiles covering the walls. It wasn't storage, it was a room. My light caught the edge of something metallic, a bed frame, small and narrow. There was also a sink, its porcelain cracked and yellowed. I remember whispering to myself, "What the hell is this?" I widened the opening until I could climb through. The room was barely 6 feet wide, 8 long, no windows, just a vent in the corner that connected to the house's main air duct. The floor tiles were stained, faint brown patches spreading beneath where the bed had once stood. And on the wall above it was a set of iron brackets, spaced exactly shoulder width apart. There was something cruel about how symmetrical it was. When I crouched down, I noticed a small circular hole in the tile wall opposite the bed. It was clean, deliberate, like a lens port. I pressed my flashlight against it and saw a faint glimmer of glass inside. A camera, an old one. The next morning, I called Ben to help me move the bed frame out. It was heavier than it looked. Solid iron, painted white once upon a time. The underside was rusted and left dark streaks on the floor. Behind it, I found something that made my stomach turn. A rusted metal box, half buried under debris. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, curled and yellowing. Some showed the same room, same bed, same camera angle. But the lighting was different, the shadows unfamiliar. And in some of them, there were people, women, sleeping, unaware. Each photo had a handwritten number on the back, like some sort of catalog. I stopped after the 5th photo. That evening, I went back to the city office and asked about the previous owner again, Mrs. Downs. The clerk hesitated this time, glancing at his screen. "She lived there until 1989, he said slowly. After that, no forwarding record. House was vacant until it went up for estate auction in 2004. He scrolled further, frowning. "There's a note here from 1990. Police inquiry regarding missing person." I froze. "Who?" He looked uncomfortable. "A tenant. Rented the back unit, but that extension doesn't exist anymore." I felt my pulse in my throat. When I got home, I checked the wall again. The camera lens was still there, dull and lifeless, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had once stood right where I was standing, recording whoever had been in that bed. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time the house settled, it sounded like movement from inside the walls. 3 nights later, just past 2 a.m., a faint click echoed from the hall. It was soft, almost polite, like a switch being pressed. I sat up. The air felt heavier, thicker, and then I heard it again. A rhythmic tick, 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 coming from inside the wall near the sealed room. My first thought was electrical wiring, but the sound was too slow, too deliberate. I stepped closer, pressing my hand against the paint. It was cold. Then came another noise, a dull scrape, like metal dragging faintly against tile. That was enough for me. I went outside and sat in my car until sunrise. The next day, I called the police. 2 officers came, a woman named Detective Lowe, and a younger man whose name I didn't catch. They listened patiently as I explained what I'd found. At first, they were skeptical, until I showed them the hidden room. Their flashlights swept the tiles, the iron brackets, the old camera lens. Lowe crouched beside the hole, examining it carefully. Then she turned toward me, expression unreadable. "Do you mind if we remove part of the wall?" she asked. Within an hour, they had a small forensics team at the house. When they pulled the paneling behind the camera lens, there was a cavity just wide enough for someone to stand behind and watch through a small slit. And inside that cavity, old electrical wiring, a microphone, and a reel-to-reel tape recorder, still plugged into a dead socket. The tapes were brittle with age, the labels handwritten in neat capital letters. Session 4, Night 12, Patient 3. That word, patient, sent a chill through me. The next few days were a blur. Forensics took the tapes, the photos, and sealed off the house as an active investigation. When they called me later that week, Detective Lowe said quietly, "There's reason to believe this house was used for unauthorized psychiatric treatments, possibly in the late 70s or early 80s. Some kind of private confinement setup." I remember gripping the phone tighter. "You mean like experiments?" She didn't answer directly, but her silence said enough. A few days later, after they'd cleared me to return for my belongings, I went back one last time. The house looked smaller somehow, stripped of its quiet charm. The plywood now covered the section of wall where the door had been opened, like a bandage over something that shouldn't be touched. As I packed, the air felt wrong, like the atmosphere itself held memory. Every creak in the floor made me flinch. I turned off the lights one by one until only the hallway lamp remained. Just as I reached for the switch, I heard it. That same faint click, coming from behind the plywood. I stood frozen, breath shallow. Then came another sound, the faint whir of something mechanical, like a tape reel spinning slowly back to life. I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed my boxes, stepped outside, and didn't look back. 2 weeks later, Detective Lowe called me with an update. They had recovered partial recordings from the tapes. Each one captured a female voice, distressed, confused, asking where she was, followed by a calm, male voice responding with clinical detachment. Only fragments survived, but one phrase repeated clearly at the start of each tape. "Session begins. Subject confined. Observation continues." They traced the tapes back to a man named Dr. Arthur Downs, the husband of the former owner. He'd been a licensed psychiatrist until 1979, when his practice license was revoked for unethical experimentation. He died in 1985. And the missing tenant? Never found. I sold the house within a month. Now, every place I live in, I check for hollow walls. I tap on them, listening for echoes. And sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night and the silence feels too complete, I swear I can still hear that faint sound, the gentle click of a recorder being switched on.